So the second chapter is primarily about apprenticeship, and the first concept that really gravitated to me was this whole concept of mentorship. And I think from the Robert Greene universe, mentorship is needed for mastery to attain the life task. And then this brings about all types of questions. What does a mentor look like? Apparently Warren Buffett mentored Bill Gates. Socrates, from the philosophical context, mentored Plato. So to me, I feel like a big part of mentorship is the sharing of knowledge. So my question to you would be, do you think mentorship is important? And if it is important, what does good mentorship look like?
Well, there's no question about the first part of that question that's important. I mean, our knowledge, our system of knowledge is based on, skills, knowledge, insights that have been acquired throughout our entire cultural history. That's why we read books. That's why we form teams, why we have supervisors. It's because we can, imbue our knowledge down to people who are coming up and learning, and it shortcuts the process of achieving a goal. So absolutely, to the first part of the question, it's a definite yes. So the second part of the question was, how do we recognise good mentorship?
Good effective mentorship.
Yeah, effective mentorship. Several ways, I think. So one clear way, I think, is if someone is widely recognised and already has a number of people who are mentees who you can point to and say, well, here's the track record. So a very, very simple test. Is this someone who has that skill? So, for example, a professor in a university might typically mentor a range of students, and you can be pretty assured that that's, in one sense, at least in an academic sense, good mentorship, because the students are achieving results, that they are giving good feedback, and so on. But then there are situations where mentorship is not a formal activity, as it would be in that case, the more informal sense. And there's probably a degree to which words such as friendship and mentorship overlap. The best friend you can have is not one who will tell you everything's fine, tell you you're fine, no problem, don't worry, I promise you all will be good. If anything, that is quite dubious. The best friend you can have is one who, first of all, is going to listen to everything you're going to say, and listen with intention, and listen with questions. Questions are a very important part of listening.
So this is a brief intermission. I sincerely hope you're enjoying the journey. And if you are enjoying the journey, please consider to like and subscribe. I repeat, consider to like and subscribe. And with that being said, let's get back to the program.
But then the second part is to give honesty in terms of the feedback and so on, which everyone's free to take or leave. But I think then it sort of suggests that when you're trying to decide who your real friends are, they're not necessarily the people who you most want to see on a particular day, who are kindest to you. They could be the people who are giving you things you don't want to hear in a constructive way, in a friendly way, in a confidential way. So I think outside the domain of formal mentorship arrangements, it's really important to choose your friends wisely, because they are your mentors. Amongst that group would probably include parents. Parents are significant or could be significant mentors one way or the other, for better or for worse. One thing you do know is that they generally have your interest at heart, and very well worth listening to, old-fashioned as that sounds.
So in one sense then, what you're saying is that you could have a mentorship isn't just a relationship with one person, it can be multifarious. So you could have your parents as a mentor, you could have certain friends as a mentor, you could have an uncle as a mentor, you could have a formal mentorship.
I think so.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I guess looking at it from the formal perspective, I guess if you were a scientist, you wanted to get better at science, you would need a mentorship program by a great scientist.
It would be nice. It would be nice.
as opposed to, it was a great mathematician or something, because obviously you're trying to. I think mentorship, to put it the other way, it's like, imagine if you wanted to be a writer and then you got mentorship by Robert Greene. That's like the top of the pyramid, isn't it? And I guess you would want the equivalent in any other fields, whether it's science, mathematics.
It could well be.
It could well be. Whatever.
Let me just slightly push back on that as being the only option. So that's a good option, I would have thought, but possibly not the only option. So, for example, there may be people whose skill is not the art itself, but the teaching of it. For example, when you look at, say, Magnus Carlsen, who recently won the World Championship for classical chess, playing Jan Nepomniachtchi, I can't think his name is. Must try and read that properly. They have teams of mentors, and not one of them is as good as either of the key players. Not one of them. So how is it that they can mentor them? And it's partly, it reminds me of the way one of my professors used to mentor me in a tutorial group. I'd ask a complicated question, and he never answered it. The way he responded was to ask me questions, force me to, embarrass myself until I found the right answer. So I think there's, mentorship can come from people who actually have less skill in the actual domain itself, but have the capability of extracting from you what you could already know if you knew how to find it.
So in that sense, there's a difference between being brilliant in your field and being a brilliant mentor.
I think
Meaning you could be a great mathematician, but not a good mentor, but you could be a great mentor as a mathematician, but maybe not the greatest mathematician.
Absolutely. And that takes us back to the first segment, finding your purpose in life. It may be, if it's true that we have a unique purpose in the sense of, this calling, this kind of this feeling that we can discover as to where we want to go. It may be, it is the case, it should be the case, that nobody else would know that unless you tell them. Now, if you don't know what that is, it may be the right sort of mentor that can help you find it, even though they can't possibly know what it is, which illustrates the fact that the mentor doesn't have to be the expert in the achievement that's required. Much more to do with the development and bringing out of your skills.
So another thing that struck out to me on this chapter, which would have been February, is this whole concept of learning by doing. So I guess the question here is, what is the best way to learn? And according to Robert Greene, we accelerate our learning by doing. So I guess there's a few questions I have here. So number one, do you agree with that premise? Do we accelerate our learning by doing? And to you, where does university fall within that? Does the university engage in what Robert Greene would call real effective learning?
Well, that's an interesting point, because it brings together a number of the previous things we've talked about. I don't think you can learn by doing per se, because you may be doing all the wrong things and you will never learn anything. You may learn to break something and that's about it. On the other hand, if you never do anything and you have simply an abstraction of what it is that needs to be done, again, it achieves nothing and it involves no learning. So it seems to me there's an essential symbiosis of previous experience, theory, practice, and then the doing. So in terms of the university and the way that, or universities and the way that fit into it, absolutely they're an essential part. Firstly, to the theoretical and the underpinning, learning the knowledge, picking up the knowledge that has already been acquired over many, many years. And it's that knowledge which gives you the capability to do things. So I think it's an inseparable symbiosis of theory and practice, and universities perform an absolutely invaluable role in doing that. It's not just the learning. There's also something about universities which create a pathway with momentum and inertia that enable you to fight through the difficulties. You can get mentorship, you can get the theoretical background, you can get encouragement, you then publish papers, and you get some recognition, and in other words, it creates a pathway which, if people were to do this in their living rooms or their studies at home, we would not achieve a tiniest fraction of what we're able to achieve with the propellant force of the university.
Yeah, I think, because I agree that we learn by doing, but if, like you're saying, we can't just do, there has to be a process, and I guess that process of action is important, but then, like you said, there's this process of reflection. It's almost like if we're trying to set up a business, but in theory it's the greatest business ever, but we don't do any action, that business definitely will not work. So action, like you said, is essential. It's an essential step, but it has to have a relationship with reflection, I think.
Mm-hmm. Yes, and it's an iterative process as well. I think, as you're doing, you're now learning. What does learning mean? It means building more into that theoretical knowledge base. So you augment that theoretical knowledge base, and then your next bit of learning comes from the next bit of doing. In science, there's a much bigger extrapolation of that, which is that we are well beyond the stage where we can use just the knowledge bit to produce information and understanding that we can never obtain through doing. And I suspect it's the same at every level of learning by doing.
Mm. And another concept, the final concept in this chapter, is the 10,000 hour rule. And this is the notion that mastery requires 10,000 hours. And the example given to illustrate this is Einstein, because apparently it took him 10 years for his own personal scientific mastery.
But let's take the Einstein example. So my recollection of Einstein is not so much that he took 10 years to master physics. It was never a linear process of, learning a bit more. Oh, there it is, general relativity. Nothing like that whatsoever. It was more about, he was sitting on a train. Okay, this is an equally stylized version, but sitting on a train, or while he was sitting on a train, doing his Gedanken experiment of figuring out what would happen if you were a particle of light and you were observed by observers in different frames of reference, and pretty much all his insights I could explain right now how he got them, without any maths, without any abstraction at all. It's really quite straightforward, but what did take a bit of time was to learn the maths. So this is the equivalent of the skill, the skill element, not the insight, not the genius, none of that, but just the skill. So that did take a little time, and he got a lot of help from somebody called Minkowski, for example, and others who were better mathematicians. But as for 10,000 hours to become the most recognized physicist since time began, it had nothing to do with it.
So I guess one of the issues with it, because I think what Robert Greene has argued in the past is that through an effective mentorship you can streamline that process and it can be more effective, and you can maybe engage in less hours. I think the first thing to establish here is that 10,000 hours is not the magic number. You just don't go 10,000 hours and it's like, yeah, I'm there. The magic is there. To me, when I look at the 10,000 hours, to me it basically says that if you engage a long time to a particular activity, you're solution focused, you use reflection, then you're likely to become very good at that particular thing. And I think in that inner core, or from that understanding, the 10,000 hours has some validity, but not as like this definitive scientific equation. So I guess in conclusion, I would say with regards to this chapter, the emphasis is mentorship. And I think mentorship definitely does streamline the process. It definitely is an effective way to get good at something. This premise of learning by doing, if the learning by doing has a relationship of reflection and learning, then I think also that's a real effective way to learn. I guess what we share here is a bit of a skepticism towards this 10,000 hours, but I think we both agree that if someone's good at something, so if someone has the inner voice and they're really good at this particular thing and then they devote 10,000 hours to it, then yes, they can achieve mastery. But this 10,000 hours is a very generalized figure. It's not, it's not set in stone. What would be your conclusion on that chapter?
There's nothing you said I would disagree with. Other than, not other than, but along with, to say that if someone does have that, that drive, that inner voice, that direction, do put in that. If 10,000 hours is good for you, do that. 5, whatever it takes. But it's the discipline that really matters.